Welcome back, everyone. This is a continuation of our video on the Massport garden tiller overhaul. And so we're at a point where we are ready to rebuild our carburetor. And here it is. In the previous video, we tore this carburetor down and we cleaned it. And we're now ready to start getting it back together. So I got my rebuild kit in the mail. And here it is. Now this is a universal rebuild kit for Briggs and Stratton horizontal shaft carburetors. And let's see what we got. So we have our fuel pump gasket. That's this guy here. Put that on a clean surface. We don't want to get it all smudgy. And we've got a couple of base gaskets. One of these will fit. Alright, so here's our, one of these is an intake gasket. One of them is a base gasket. And looks like this is going to be one option, option A. Are they the same gasket? I think they are, pretty much. So we got our base gasket there. We got our, this is our air filter gasket. Well, maybe not for this carburetor, but for a different version of it. And one of these will be the base gasket for this carburetor, so we just need to figure out which one that is. So I'm thinking, let's find the one that closely matches the bottom of our carburetor. It's going to have 3 prominent screw holes, although they may not be perfectly lined up. I think it's going to be this one. Yeah, that'll fit. Yeah, that looks like that'll fit. So that gives away, so let's take a look at this carburetor again. So we've got this port here. This is our fuel output or discharge port. This is where the fuel pump discharges fuel into the pre-chamber. And yeah, that'll do her. Let's just make sure there's not a better one, a better fit. I think we've got 2 of those. We've got this one here, which, when laid on top, is roughly the same. So we have like multiples of the same part. Okay, I'll take it. Alright. This is a different version of the intake gasket. Not for this carburetor, but for a different version of that, the unit. Alright, cool. Okie dokie. Artichoke. So, looks like our filter gasket is just a wee bit too small. That's okay. We still have the original one, and that works. Okay. Start off with some of the hard parts, like the needle and the seat. So, in this bag, we've got, looks like a new jet. We've got a new needle valve seat, needle valve, and all the other fixings. Now this carburetor has a fixed single jet, so we won't be needing all those parts. Let's see what we have in our Yankee toolbox. I'm going to pop this guy off and take a look at that main jet and see what it looks like. I think it's fine. I'm not too concerned. What size is it? What's this? 13 millimeter? No. I got my metrics and my standards all mixed haphazardly. That's good enough. That's good enough for government work. Let's crack this guy off and see what's inside. Alright, so there's our main jet way down in there. Now it's... I'm looking at these 2 jets and they're not the same. This one is much bigger than this one. the size difference is so stark. So we're just going to leave well enough alone with the jet. The jet looks pretty clean. We'll just put a new seal on that seat there. I'm not going to bother with the new seat because the original one's in pretty good shape. These are something you don't really have to replace these. I don't see why you would have to, but we are going to pop in a new O-ring, and we did get a new one of those, so we'll put that in. And we'll just thread that seat back on with a new gasket. And we'll crank her down. Now, some of these carburetors have more than one jet. This one does not. They'll have a high and a low or an idle, and it's just a simple little carburetor. We're going to put this washer here, this brass washer. Let's compare the needle valves and see if they're. No, they're not the same. So this needle valve is for a different carburetor altogether. That's okay. We don't really need to replace things that we don't need to replace. There's just no point in that. What else do we have in there? Oh, here we go. Yeah. This is the one that. Yeah, look, we're not going to change the needle valve. This guy's just fine. We're not gonna change that. So we're gonna put where's the spring that came with the original? A lot of times these carburetor kits come with parts that you really don't need to replace. My philosophy is it's sometimes better to just keep what you have, because the quality of machining in these 1980s Briggs parts, the materials and the machining is far better than anything you're going to get from one of these kits. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact. So some of the parts that you're going to pull off the carburetor, if they're not worn out, don't replace them. Because you could end up causing problems where you didn't have them before. So I'm just going to finger tight this down all the way. Alright, and then we're going to grab a screwdriver. Okay, so that's all the way in. It was one complete turn out. Alright, let's go back in all the way again. Sometimes it's easier with a screwdriver. Because you can make your turns in more fluid motion, you know what I mean? So we were what? One complete turn and in an eighth or so. So that's going to be our starting point when we get this engine running again. That'll be it. Just a starting point, and we can adjust up or down from there. Now we can work on our fuel pump. Now the fuel pump gasket, it looks like they all use the same one because there's only one fuel pump gasket in this entire kit. So we're going to use the one that came with it. Now you see how these are little one-way, they're like little reed valves, like in a two-stroke engine. And they're just designed to lightly cover the ports. And that's all they do. But I have let's compare it with the original one. See, look at the original one. It's all nasty and gross. But I have a hunch that it's not cut exactly the same. Let's just do a quick little comparison here. Now, it's not the same gasket. This is more of a universal version of the original. It's made from it's not even the same material. It's very thin material, not as thick, definitely not as stiff, but that could be a good thing. All right, so let's just see. Yeah, it's about the same. Very similar. Okay. Now I want to point this out too. Oh yeah, we need to reassemble the we need to put the this little coil spring goes in there. And then this little ring here that goes, you got to get all the schmutz out of there. That should be, from sitting in the garage, it got a little dirty. We don't want any dirt in our clean rebuilt carburetor. So I just want to show how this works. So these little reed valves. Oh, wait, that's not right. That's not right at all. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So these flaps cover this port on this side here. Okay, so when there's a vacuum applied to that port, it's going to suck this flap right up against it. And on the cover end, there's a port over here that the other flap covers. And the way it looks, it's drawing fuel in from this port from the tank into this chamber, and then pushing it out this port, which shoots it across the carburetor down into this port down here. You take your clean finger and just make sure there is nothing, there's no debris in there, there's nothing that's going to cause us any problems. You're going to find your screws. There should be 4 of them. And screw it. Screw it in. Now it's kind of late in the night, so I'm not going to be putting this thing back together tonight and starting it up. We'll do that another time. It'll be in the same video, so don't worry. It's just a little late, and I don't want to... It's going to be seamless to you, because you're the viewer. You're going to watch the finished product. But for me, I'm going to be doing this video over a couple of days. So we want to torque... You want to just lightly snug these up. Then you want to torque them in a sequence. I don't know what the proper sequence is, but I'm going to do this. Do it again. And give it a final tweak. There is a proper sequence to these, I'm sure. I don't know what that is. Okay, that should be good enough. When is it ever really good enough, huh? Okay, that's good enough. Okay, so our fuel pump is back together. We have a little extra material, so don't be alarmed. There's an extra ear here. That's not like you didn't do anything wrong. That is leftover material because this gasket is universal. It fits many carburetors, not just this one. And we're just going to take our knife, just for aesthetics, and we're going to kind of cut that off. There's no harm in leaving it there, but it's also not necessary. Oh, I have a dull blade on this guy. It's not a sharper blade. Oh, here's a brand new one. Nope, that one's also pretty nasty. Well, you get the idea. I'll get a nice blade and we'll clean it off. There we go. There we go. Good as new. Okay, now where can we go from here? So, in my little parts bin, we're going to go ahead and we're going to just throw the carburetor on the fuel tank. We can't secure it down because the fuel tank has to be off in order to install it. So, I mean, the carburetor has to be off the tank. Put it on. When fitting this base gasket, make sure you're not covering any ports. And we're not, so we're in good shape. Okay. That would be a devastating move because you would have, you know, problems, big ones. But anyway. So we're just going to nudge the gasket into position. Make sure it's good and central. And you'll notice that the holes in the gasket are smaller. than the holes in the base of the carburetor, that's okay. They will self-center. For the most part. Because the screws are shaped the way they are at the end, you'll notice how they're they have an unthreaded portion. That is designed to punch right through the gasket and center the carburetor to the in relation to the gasket. So. Before we get into it, I want to make sure I don't forget to mention something that is actually a critical point that I missed, and I have to chalk my own ignorance up to this one. Chalk this up to my own ignorance. I did not realize that the engine that we're working on has a compression release. A compression release is often added to certain small engines as a means of making the engine easier to start. Usually you're going to find them on chainsaws. And compression releases come in a variety of different engineering methods and different ways to do it. On the Briggs and Stratton Easy Start engines, the ones that, at least the older ones, that actually say Easy Start right on the flywheel cover, those have a special camshaft lobe on the intake side that keeps the intake valve open just a tiny bit, just a fraction of a fraction of a whatever. Anyway, it keeps the valve open just enough to reduce the compression upon startup. The purpose of this, again, is to make the engine easier to start. It's a very low effort starting system, and once the engine gains speed, I forget the mechanism in which allows this to happen, but the camshaft lobe, or I believe the camshaft slides over or something, and the valve operates normally. So the engines are going to have, by default, a low compression situation when the engines are not running. So I just thought I would point that out because somebody else, one of my viewers, did point that out to me, and I did not realize this. So now you know. Okay, so all we have to do is basically divorce the tank from the carburetor to get this back on the engine, and she should run. This thing will start. I'm confident that it will run. But that's as far as we're going to go right now, and we're going to have to come back to this and see what happens. I want to show you guys something. This is, you'll never see this again because they don't make stuff like this anymore. But this little rubber part, this is the PVC tube elbow. It connects the PVC tube, the positive crank ventilation tube, to the carburetor body. And it is 40 years old. And it is as supple as if it were made yesterday. But I am fairly confident that this part has never been replaced. You won't find rubber parts like this on the lawnmower that you bought today 40 years, hell, you won't find that 10 years from now. Parts like this are no longer made from the same formulas as they once were. I don't know what the formula was, but I have never seen one of these go bad in an early Briggs motor. They were just made the right way the first time. No company is making parts like that anymore. And I want to say that the proliferation of Chinese engines in today's equipment is, well, let's just put it this way. The rubber parts like this coming out of China are made from like biodegradable rubber. I don't know what this stuff is, but it does not hold up like this. It just doesn't. And it's not. And again, it's not that we don't have the technology to make these parts last, because we damn well do. The problem is we don't. Now it could be because the modern rubber compounds that are used on little bits like this are made to be more environmentally friendly. It's possible. You know, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, but you know, it's still quite alarming. I mean, you know, I'm coming back from or kind of returning to my roots here as somebody who used to fix up old motor scooters, and the Chinese scooters often have parts like that fail within the first 2 or 3 years because they just either they're the wrong compounds for the application, or they are just not made right. Whoever was at the chemical mixing plant hit the wrong button. I don't know. But I mean, look at this O-ring. This is definitely an original O-ring, and look at this guy. It is totally supple, absolutely perfectly supple. Hey, whatever. So, all right, I think we're ready to put her back together, and we'll do that when we come back. Now, why is it that every time I buy a new set of screwdrivers, within a couple of months, I end up with a drawer full of about 15 flathead screwdrivers? Hey, drives me so crazy, man. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're going to reconnect our carburetor, put it back on the block, reattach the oil or the crankcase breather line. We've got the linkage put back to where it belongs. That connects to the governor. And we're going to take our carburetor gasket. We're going to slip that guy right in there. So Briggs and Stratton engines, from my experience, have been a lot easier to work on than Tecumseh engines, and only because they're a very simple design that hadn't really changed much for about 50 years, and until recently. Like now, I don't know if they still make these Pulsa-Prime or Pulsa-Jet carburetors. I think they've largely moved to a float carburetor in most of their lawnmower engines, but there was a time when these Pulsa-Jet carburetors were pretty much ubiquitous on all but the more powerful engines, like their original snowblower engines, for example. I believe they used an updraft carburetor on those, which I believe used a float. But these carburetors, as we've just learned in the last video, actually no, earlier in this video, I discussed how the carburetor actually works, but these do not depend on a float. They use a small vacuum-operated fuel pump. And it's a very simple design. It works pretty reliably. And being that there was no float, they weren't really as prone to settlement building up inside, causing them to, to clog and die. And every Tecumseh engine I have ever had has had sediment build up in the float, which requires, periodic disassembly of the carburetor due to the lack of any fuel filters in consumer equipment back in the day. Not sure why that wasn't standard equipment, but anyway. These carburetor flange bolts are a little tricky to get to with any meaningful tools, but there, that's pretty secure. We've got our governor hooked up. We did not, we forgot to hook up the governor spring. Now, where does that attach to? I do believe that attaches to this guy here. I didn't mark off which holes they go to, but maybe I should have. Yeah, it looks about right. Yeah, this was designed, I believe. Yeah, we'll have to get it all hooked up. See what's what all. I do it by whether it looks right. Okay. Get the fuel tank in there. And I was having an issue. Oh, you know why? Because I have the I've got the crankcase breather line in the wrong spot. There we go. So we'll just get these lightly in place. There we are. Let me just get these in sequence. There we are. Yeah, due to EPA restrictions, I believe these carburetors are largely they've largely gone the way of the Dodo, and that's unfortunate because they are reliable, but and low maintenance for the most part. Okay, so now we want to put the control lever in the stop position. And in the stop position, we want to make sure that this guy is all the way forward. Okay? This way, the stop position actually does what it says. It stops the engine. And then we'll tighten this guy up here. There we are. So now in the choke position, it should open the choke up, and it does. Okay, that's nice. Very nice. And we got to hook up the the magneto grounding wire, or the coil grounding wire. This doesn't have a magneto; it's got a coil, I think. Ignition ground. There we are. Okay, now just putting a little bit of fuel in there should get her going. I bet she starts up on the first pull. What do you think? Alright, that's a little bit high in the sky. I don't think that's going to happen because it's not really primed. So, one thing that I want to make sure I don't overlook, and that is put the air filter in so that the engine is running under the correct amount of vacuum on startup. It's actually fairly important. So if you adjust the carburetor without the breather, I'm sorry, without the air filter, it's not going to be running with the correct amount of vacuum. So it's just not going to run right. That's important. Look at how little space we have left for the fuel filler. That's crazy. Now this fuel has stabilizer in it, so we're gonna just put it in. Should be enough. And I'll put a little more. The small tank. An overfiller. That should do it. Okay. The cap on. I'm gonna have to oh, you know what? We have a few more things to do. We still need to secure the fuel tank brace to the block. And the brace for the, yeah, I'm not going to bother with that. fine. It'll live. It's a homemade bracket anyway. Somebody added that for the PCV line. Okay. Choke. Here we go. First startup. Unedited. Might want to get stuff out of the way. Hey, you know something? Let's just see what happens. Here we go. Let's give it a couple of little pumping. You know something? I've got a new spark plug for this thing. Alright, so I just gapped the new plug to 30 thousandths of an inch, and that should do it. I believe that's what Briggs usually calls for on these engines. Okay. I want to start this engine without any magic juice because we want to prove that that fuel pump is working again. That's kind of why we did all this. And if it doesn't work, well, it was all for nothing. So. Oh, and by the way, my father just informed me that he doesn't even want the thing back in the first place, so I guess this is my new tiller. She runs pretty good. Now that was, what did I do? 3 pulls and then a 4th one. Started right up. So that was like maybe 4 pulls. That's a cold engine. That's one that has been fully drained of its juice. So it looks like we've got a situation where we didn't hook something up. Like there's some missing linkage, I'm thinking. So this should be able to open that throttle up and without fully extending the choke. So I think there's a piece of linkage missing here. That's what I'm thinking. Okay, I made some adjustments. Let's see if that helps. So I'm going to put it into just get it into the on position. See, there's a little bit of seepage, but in terms of running this, Although that could be fuel that I may have spilled. But just to be on the safe side, we're just going to retorque this. Yeah, that's good and tight. That's good and tight. How an engine runs at low speed, it's actually pretty critical. Anyway, I'm going to give this guy a clean bill of health. I think it's running just fine. Everything works. I'll start it up and run it a little bit and check for another leak. So let's see what happens here. I'm going to just go ahead and leave the air cleaner off. And there you have it. You know, it runs pretty good. From 1981. I think it's 40 years old and purrs like a kitten. That's the thing I like about these old Briggs engines too. I mean, once you get them, it doesn't take much to get them running. And when they do run, they run better than any engine you can buy today. That right there, this Toro that I just bought last fall, it doesn't run smoothly at all. It just, I mean, it runs fine, you know, for what it is, but it's, see, the modern engines are so lean, they're dialed in so lean that they're anemic. And unfortunately, that has to be that way. I mean, these small engines are highly polluting engines. At least they were. They're not catalyzed. You know, they were often built without any means of vapor recovery for the fuel system. You know, so they're terrible for the environment. But boy, do they run so nice. It purrs like a kitten. No fuel leaks. I didn't see any additional fuel. I think that might have been a drop of fuel that just spilled there when I filled it. So, and it tore up the yard without even bogging down. So we can put that one in the books and move on. Thank you again for watching, and I hope you've had a great. Hope you have a great July 4th. If we're in the U.S., have a great 4th of July and stay safe.